continuing to go on and on. It's hard to tell, but we're going to call that good because it's very warm outside. All right, good morning. It's good to be with you. I think I've met all of you, but some of you have been asking, aren't you moving? Why are you still here? And I get that quite a bit. Kayla and I are moving at the end of August, so we're going to be hanging out with you through a very warm summer together. So looking forward to that. So we are going to look at a story this morning, and we're going to look at it pretty quickly. I realize it's quite warm. You're fanning yourself. I don't want anyone to heat stroke out here. So we'll move through it pretty quickly. But we're going to look at a story that, like I said, the lectionary brought up this week. And it's actually about a father. And so I don't know if it was planned that way, but it is appropriate for Father's Day. Before we do that, I don't know how you feel on Father's Day. I think it's just important to acknowledge, like in a church space, that Father's Day carries a lot of mixed emotions for people. I hope that it's a joyous celebration for you, that you can remember and celebrate the fathers and the men in your life well. But some of us, maybe you didn't have a great father, and it's okay to feel that today and to experience that. Or maybe you've lost a father. This is the third Father's Day without my dad. So it's a mix of emotions. It's sort of a bittersweet sort of thing. So whatever you're experiencing today, I hope that you can completely bring that to church. You don't have to pretend to be something or not. So if it's a joyful day, experience that joy. If it's a hard day, it's okay. Experience that and own that as well. So with that said, let's look at a story about a father, but we're not actually going to talk about what it means to be a father that much. We're actually going to talk about faith a little bit. So this story is a pretty classic Sunday school story. If you grew up in church, you've probably heard it a few times. It's about a father named Abraham, who had many sons, and I'm one of them, and so are you. You know the song. We're not going to do the motions. Carrie's doing them. But it's about Abraham, and it's about how he became a father, and it's about a story of faith. And it's found in Genesis 18. Genesis 18 is printed on the inside of your bulletin. I was going to read all of it to you, and then it turned out to be like 92 degrees. So I'm going to let you take that home and read that in the comfort of your own air-conditioned apartment or home or car or whatever it is. I'll summarize the story for you, and you can fact-check me on it if you want, so feel free to throw a hand up and say, that's not right, you got that wrong. So, the story in Genesis 18 goes like this. Abraham is hanging out in a tent, presumably on a hot day, kind of like this, so it's actually pretty appropriate. And these three men walk by, and he sees them, and he perks up, and he bows down to them, which is a common thing to do. And he welcomes them in. He says, come on in, it's hot, come into the tent. And he says, let me go kill a calf for you so we can have some dinner. And he goes to his wife Sarah, and he says, can you make some bread? And they have some bread, and some meat, and some milk. And they sit there together. And one of them says, Abraham, I'm going to come back next year. And at that point, your wife Sarah is going to have a baby. Now Sarah, the verse says, was old and just physically could not have kids. I'm not going to break down the physicality of that. You're all adults. You understand what that looks like. But she could not have kids, and so she laughed. She laughed at these messengers' sort of promise of hope. And they're like, why are you laughing? Is anything too great for God? And so they go away. And then if you circle back to chapter 21, 3 chapters later, lo and behold, Sarah is pregnant and has a child. So this is the story. This is a story about faith. It's a kind of ridiculous and over-the-top story. It's a story that might be hard to believe, but it's a really important story. So I want us to unpack it and look at what it tells us about faith specifically. Specifically faith when life is hard and when life doesn't turn out the way that you think it's supposed to. Because there's some backstory to this. Here's the deal. If you read all of Genesis, long before this chapter comes up, Abraham was promised something by God. He was promised a son from Sarah. And he was promised a son that would bless the entire world. So it wasn't like a selfish promise, like, oh, you get a son, congrats. That son was supposed to be a blessing to all of creation. So Abraham waited, and waited, and waited, and waited, and nothing happened. And Sarah and he both got older, and older, and older, and older, to the point where it just seemed like it wasn't going to happen. And so when you look at the story of Abraham greeting these three men and this promise, we're supposed to feel the weight of that slowness. Now, if you actually look at what this story was trying to do to the people who were hearing it, it was supposed to instill that same sort of hope in the midst of a long wait. See, this story was originally probably told around campfires and passed down from generation to generation. Eventually it was written down in this book. And it was probably finally written down when Israel, these people who were hearing it, were in exile. they had been promised stuff by God too. They had been promised their own land. They had been promised to be a blessing to all creation as well. But they weren't feeling it. They weren't experiencing it. They were sitting under the heavy hand of tons of different rulers, the people who were oppressing them. They weren't free. See, they were meant to read the story and say, all right, God can show up then, maybe God can show up now as well. Fast forward a little bit. Paul talks about this story. Paul talks about it in Romans 4. And he talks about Abraham's faith in this story. And we're not going to unpack all of Romans 4 because it's super long, but in this story, Paul keeps saying over and over again how great Abraham's faith is. And he kind of summarizes it with this. This is Romans 4:17. He says, so Abraham is our father in the eyes of God in whom he had faith. The God who gives life to the dead and calls into existence things that did not exist. The God who gives life to the dead and calls into existence things that did not exist. Paul looks at the story of Abraham, the story of sort of a long, slow wait and hope. And he sees resurrection. He sees what we've been talking about for the last few weeks. A God who is capable of taking something that seems impossible, that seems dead, that seems ridiculous, and breathing new life into it. So I think the question for us that we should look at today is, if Paul is so obsessed with Abraham's faith, and if Abraham's faith is the sort of faith that leads to resurrection, then what does Abraham's faith look like? And what does it look like for us today? Specifically, what does it look like for us today when life hasn't gone the way that we want it to? When things are a little bit hard and we feel like God hasn't shown up in the ways that we want God to show up. So oftentimes we talk about faith, and we look at what Paul says, what Abraham says, and we talk about faith in terms of like unwavering belief in something, right? So the opposite of faith we often think of as what? Doubt? Okay. I'll say doubt. We think of it as doubt, as wavering in our belief in God and the things that we think about God. But Abraham wavered a lot. I don't know if you ever read this story, but Abraham is wavering all over the place. So in that long period of waiting, Abraham didn't just like hang out and sit there and say, like, God's going to come through. Eventually what happened was Abraham and Sarah got together and they said, well, why don't we just make a baby with someone else? And so they got one of their young servants and made a baby with them. And they said, okay, God wasn't showing up, so we're going to do this instead. We're going to do like a side project, and maybe God will use that. So that's a little bit of like wavering faith, right? Like having an affair to try to fulfill God's promise. That's not our ideal version of faith. I don't know about what church you were raised in, but that wasn't the ideal version of faith I was told. And then, even in the story we're talking about, Sarah laughs at God. So somewhere in the process, they became cynical. So it wasn't like their faith was this sort of like blazing hope. It was something that eventually turned kind of hard and cynical. So faith can't be unwavering hope and trust. And then, even after this story, if you read on in between Genesis 18 and Genesis 21, Abraham actually accidentally gives Sarah away to someone else, which sounds like ridiculous and hard to do, but he somehow, even after God promises, like, okay, this woman is going to have your child, just trust me, like 2 chapters later, he accidentally kind of like sells her, it sounds awful, kind of like gives her away into a horde of wives to another man. Like, what kind of faith is that? So if Abraham's faith is this gold standard, then it can't be a lack of doubt. It can't be unwavering. It can't be all the things that we normally talk about. So what is faith? What does faith look like when life is hard? By the way, side sort of note here, if you ever feel bad about your faith, just look at Abraham, because I'm pretty sure most of us haven't done those things, and we haven't given away people we care deeply about. But when we look at Abraham's faith, we see something different. We see something unexpected, something I didn't expect when I looked at this story. And you have to look at both this story in Genesis 18 and the story that comes right after it, because you're meant to read them together and contrast them. Because these 3 men that show up at Abraham's door and give him this message of hope and faith, they go on after this and do something else. They go to another place, a place maybe you've heard of before, a place called Sodom and Gomorrah. So it's this story, another kind of Sunday school story, where these men show up, and what they do is they go to this town of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they stay with this guy named Lot, who's related to Abraham. And what happens there is the whole town, at least all the men in the town, come and they beat on the door and they say, send us your men out. And this is going to get a little risque. They say, send us your men out so we can rape them. It's like, oh my gosh, what is this? And so you see that story, And you see Abraham's story, and you're like, what is going on here? What does this have to do with faith? Well, I think what we're supposed to do is look at these two stories side by side and see how these three men are treated. And we see something about faith. So let's look at Abraham's story first. Abraham, despite the fact that life hadn't gone well necessarily, despite the fact that the promises that God had made weren't showing up, despite the fact that he had messed up multiple times already, he's still open to these people who show up at his doorstep, to strangers. He shows hospitality. He doesn't just show like a little bit of hospitality. He bows down to them, which sounds strange to us, but at the time was the sign of respect that was meant for all people. To say, I'm here at your service. Welcome to my home. And then he goes beyond that. He kills a fatted calf, which, again, might sound a little weird to us. But at that time, you could just run to the store and grab some ground beef. Like, you had to grow the actual cow and then kill it. So this wasn't like just a quick ground beef sort of run. It was like he had to take something that he had had for a long time and give it up for these men. So Abraham had every right to become cynical and jaded and closed off towards people outside him. To say, you know what, these guys are showing up at my door, but I'm old. And life hasn't gone the way I want, so just keep moving. But he doesn't. He welcomes them in the same way that God welcomes everyone to the table. Then we contrast that with Sodom and Gomorrah. So you see this sort of total opposite in Sodom. What happens is these men come, and instead of a welcome, they try to abuse them and take advantage of them. Now, oftentimes we talk about Sodom and Gomorrah and say like their sin was same-sex relationships. The Bible actually doesn't really talk about that very much. Ezekiel 16 actually tells us what Sodom's problem was, and I'll read it for you real fast. It says this. Literally, it says, this is the sin of your sister Sodom. So just to clear it up. She and her daughters were proud. They had plenty to eat. They enjoyed peace and prosperity, but she didn't help the poor and needy. They became haughty and did detestable things in front of me. And I turned away from them as soon as I saw it. So the problem with Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't like a sexual thing. It was a self-centered lack of hospitality and greed. And so we're supposed to look at these two stories and see them side by side. And so when we see faith, when we wonder what faith actually is, we see it in Abraham. Faith isn't not wavering in your belief. It's not being 100% sure of God all the time. It's despite those things, despite life not going the way that you think it should, despite feeling like God hasn't shown up when God is supposed to show up, you still are open to the people around you. You still align yourself with the radical welcome and hospitality that God offers, even if you're not sure God is showing up. And that's the sort of faith that brings about resurrection. That's what Paul looks at with Abraham and says, this is the God, this is the way to lead to God who brings life from the dead. Now that's not some sort of like cosmic exchange where you do the right thing and all of a sudden God shows up for you. It's actually just aligning ourselves with the way that God is already moving. Because if God is always about resurrection, about always breathing new life into things, we see that often happens by welcoming people, by hospitality, by being open to others. So we look at Abraham's faith, we don't see this sort of lack of wavering. We don't see a perfect example. The story of Genesis doesn't give us that. It gives us someone who messed up quite a bit, who seemed to doubt, who took matters into his own hands, who experienced the hardships of life and this long wait on God. Despite all that, still had the faith to be open to the people around him. So when a stranger walked up to his door, to his tent, rolled out the red carpet, in the same way that God does for us, the same loving, divine, grace-filled. So friends, I think that's what faith is. I think that's what we see. Faith, when God is not showing up, still being open to people around us in the same way that God is. So we'll cut it off there because it's, like I said, it's really warm and I'm sweating quite a bit. And I'm